Klara Sedlacek, trauma. How does it affect children? How does it affect adults? Absolutely fascinating what's happened to Klara in her life. She's part of a refugee. She's dealt with refugee camps, and she's third generation Eastern Europe, where her parents or grandparents were had war, were around during the war, and talks about how trauma can be passed molecularly through the cells. The studies that they're doing on mice, how they expose them to all this trauma and stress. They expose them to a certain smell and then shock them. And then when their babies are born, they expose the baby to the smell and the babies get tense because they know what's coming. Absolutely fascinating how trauma affects parenthood and children in a verbal and a nonverbal way. We talk about that, what's happened to her, and how she's helping others now cope with it, and some mechanisms to help with that. Really enjoyed this conversation. Trauma is a serious, serious issue, not only here in our country, but in the world. And we need to, deal with it and learn how to cope with it so we can better ourselves and society. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Klara, so nice to meet you. Your last name Sedlacek, is that pronounced correctly?
Right. You can go the Eastern European side and say Sedlacek, but I'm okay with I'm okay with what you came up with. That's
Very
perfect.
good. How can trauma be intergenerational? How can it be passed down?
That's a great question, Joe. We are in a society that we tend to kind of skim through things and go through life so fast. We are always rushing, and then when we are triggered or things are happening to ourselves, we are like, oh, it's my problem. I have to deal with it. But often, what we don't have is the time to stop and reflect. Where is this coming from? And trauma and stress, as is such a typical symptom of our society, is rooted very deeply on the way you were brought up. Like, you are born into a situation and your body adjusts to the world. And as an infant, you start downloading and downloading. Your brain is just growing in such a crazy speed, and you are downloading the vibes, how you feel. Am I safe or not safe? What's happening to me? Then you keep going on. You're becoming a toddler, and the emotions come in, and you're starting to see if your emotions are validated. And if not, and that usually happens to a lot of us that are dealing with trying to be better parents or trying to parent in a way we were not parenting, is that our emotions were not validated, and our brain just developed these coping mechanisms and things that you kind of try to go around those unhealed events. So, but then you look back and you're like, okay, so I wasn't parented in a kind way. So you look at your parents, you're like, well, they didn't have a chance to experience, peaceful childhood because,
Hmm.
such and such, or or war issues. Like my family, they are I'm a third generation, but I grew up in peace, but I inherited the war that my grandpa and grandma went through. I inherited it in the stories that were told. I inherited in things that were not told, and I inherited the trauma in my mother's parenting.
Hmm.
Because there's been a generation of void because of the trauma that happened. They were not able to connect with their children, and that just passed down. And when you look at it from the molecular view, there's so many studies right now in the field of epigenetics that just confirm how genes are expressed differently under stress or lack of stress. So when you are building your emotional world as a child, you are building it on the experience of your parents, and they build it off the experience of their parents. And paradigms and shifts are so slow with our our humanity that things that were kind of meant to help parents are no longer helpful. So parents who are kind of struggling with parenting, they might be reaching out for things that are out there, but they are not promoting connection with their child. They are actually making them further, creating longer or bigger distance within their children and themselves. So I find that there's one study about mice, and they tried to see how much that would how much stress, maternal stress, would have to do with offsprings. And I think they came up with this acetone experience that there was an acetone smell, and then unfortunately the rat got a little bit of a zapped with a little bit of electricity.
Hmm.
And the mom created a negative experience, and then her children were born, like the little pups, and without being ever exposed to the acetone smell, as soon as they experience, or as soon as they smell that acetone, they had the same reaction as their mom.
Wow. Wow.
And that's just the beginning. That's just a small one little study. That there's way more studies now coming out on how our genes react to stress and how we inherit it.
When I we first started talking, and I was thinking, well, there's, like you said, there's things that your parents say and they don't say. You know how they act a certain way when they hear some news or something happens, they might get a little tense, and the child will feel that, just kind of coming down. Uh, but when you say it's at the, I know you're also you've got a degree in molecular biology, so you're very fortunate to see at both levels. But how it can be passed through the genes like that just amazes me, just absolutely amazes me. So the genes are actually conditioned or changed and then passed down to the youth is astounding.
Yeah, it's it's pretty astounding and shocking to how little we've been aware
Mm,
to that fact. And then when you look at it, when you have a chance to look at your childhood and you step away and you just kind of not looking at it as yourself but as an observer, and you watch yourself. Okay, this is the child. You don't really refer to yourself as me, but you look at the child, so you don't have any mechanisms kicking in right away, because we tend to kind of minimalize our experience, our bad experience. We're like, you know what, well, I didn't go through this type of trauma, so it wasn't that bad. But it really
hmm,
doesn't matter. What it matters to your level of sensitivity and to your perception. And to some people it could be as little as being dropped off in care, in childcare, and not
mm.
feeling supported. And to some people it could be, a true trauma with a big T. But it's what we really make of it. And if we don't have a chance to look at our experience in this like neutral way, and ac- acknowledge that yes, we went through a lot, but we developed these coping mechanisms that have to do with the way we came up. But it's not really, it's not pointing fingers to, hey, I'm reacting right now with my children because I'm a bad parent, but because I went through something in my childhood, something that's not, something that has not healed, or something that needs my attention now. And I find that it's kind of a liberating way of looking at parenting, when you can let go of the guilt and just be curious about what's coming up for you, and kind of grow through the experience.
You said at one point something that was really important I didn't want to gloss over, but when you said when the child's emotions aren't validated, then something kind of gets registered there. Can you elaborate on that?
I think a lot of us have, feelings they kind of build in these layers, and you have the first, like, reactive layer, or the trigger layer that we are all familiar with. Like, someone
Hmm.
cuts you in traffic and you immediately, your anger level goes up and you're like, whoa, and then you have, under that, you have more of the fears and shame and guilt. And if you kind of keep stepping down on the, emotional ladder all the way, I think all of us share this belief of being abandoned or not loved. And that's when your emotions are not validated in that, that pure basic level, where your personality and your beliefs are building in that 0 to 6. Because we are in a different, also our brain is in this downloading state, so we don't have that level of reasoning when something is done or told, to be like, okay, well, mom said this, but I think she didn't mean it this way, or I know this is not true. This comes later.
Hmm.
Initially, we are just kind of taking everything as with the face value, as this is the truth,
Hmm.
and we are taking it internally, and we are building that void within ourselves, provided your father is not the Dalai Lama, but perhaps someone who had real life issues with his own parenting and being parented. So I think that's when we are kind of, it comes to the discipline, that you start looking at yourself, who you are, but you don't really have a chance to do that if you don't stop, pause, and just kind of step out of that picture and look at the beginning, where things started to happen for yourself and where you started to develop emotionally.
You mentioned that you were third generation, and grew up in peace. My father is an Italian immigrant, and I could just remember some of the stories he told. One specifically, he was in a small village there near Naples, Italy, in the south, and the Nazis were coming through, and my uncle kind of got him and my aunt and like brought him into the woods for a couple of days, and brought him back out when everything was clear. I mean, he just kind of breezes by these stories, though. Were they manifested in the way I was raised in him? It's hard to say, but I'm sure there's much more dramatic stories that that you had with your parents. But I wonder how some of the things they say affected. We're talking kind of at the molecular level, and some of the practices, but can some of the things be really damaging and traumatizing that that the parents are telling their children about these acts and trauma that occur?
So, how old were you when you heard these stories, and how old was your father when this happened?
I'm going to say I was 10, 11, and my father was in his 40s.
And when he was brought into the woods?
Oh, when he was born into the woods, so that'd be in the 40s. So he was just a child, probably about that age, about 10.
So initially, this type of a conflict, the Second World War, I think, was traumatizing for the whole world on so many levels.
Mm,
But what has happened in Europe, I think, is that there was so much of it that we had to disconnect from it as well.
hmm,
So stories were told and retold, and then what the survivors of Holocaust find out, that after they came back, after the few of them shared the stories, initially, after a while, people were not responding anymore to the stories.
Wow.
They kind of had to turn themselves off. It's like, when you watch what's happening in the States with the school shootings, the
Hmm.
first shooting is traumatic, second one is unbelievable, third one you're like, whoa, is this really happening? And then what are we this year on, like 250?
It's terrible.
You stop reacting, but not because it's not traumatic, but because you disconnect. You shut down something in yourself so you can keep going.
Hmm.
So what has happened to so many of our parents that were in these conflicts as children, or grandparents, is something had to go for them to make it. And then if throughout your life journey you had a chance to reconnect to that, or find out what it is, then you can transfer that connection to your children. But usually you don't have it that chance. Like, life moves so quickly, and especially our parents didn't have the resources what we have now. And what's been
Hmm.
happening with the especially field of self-help and therapy and alternative techniques is that now it's way more socially acceptable to seek help and to work on yourself.
Hmm.
So I think it has totally influenced your father in the way he was parenting you,
Hmm.
in a way he was able or not able to connect with you over some emotional issues. And to you, the stories that were told, I would say, I would guess that you didn't really know much about the war. So to you, these stories were kind of new.
Hmm.
You didn't experience it, but I would say I could, what our parents shared with me was pretty traumatic for me.
Wow.
And they didn't share it with me to traumatize me. It was just they
Right.
were so normalized to it that for them it was, I remember this one time that we went to see where my grandpa fought as a resistance fighter. And I was 6 years old. We went to the field and I saw these little berries and I was so upset. And I was like, oh my God, my grandpa didn't, because they didn't have any food. So he was just eating these little berries. And it wasn't until years later that my mother actually told me that they would have to raid the village to eat.
Hmm.
But for my for my little self, even this was traumatic. And then my uncle mentioning how the planes would come in and they didn't have any weapons. So I would imagine my grandpa fighting the jets with just sticks.
Hmm.
And that, you know all these stories kind of sunk in. Year later, we are in a storm, caught out, we are sleeping outside. We were caught in a storm, and I'm just having a panic attack.
Wow.
And everybody thinks it's the storm, and I think it's the storm. Years later, I'm still super panicky. And, it took me a while to figure out what was happening. And it was the images, even though I did not go through that, the images of the conflict and of the noise of the airplanes kind of stuck in my system.
Wow.
And I must
Wow.
have brought that up on myself. But,
Wow.
nobody was. I saw movies, so I knew how roaring airplane sounds.
Sure. Sure.
But interestingly enough, when I really, really looked into it with the body mind technique and really went deep, deep to see, like, where is that coming from, it also connected to how my parents used to yell at each other when I was super, super small, like toddler. And, that level of that noise transferred to the memories of the war that I obviously did not have. And
Wow.
then that kept coming up as a irrational fear of of the storm.
Absolutely incredible. And you developed this, you just mentioned, mind body, this EFT, this emotional freedom technique. It's a
Mhm.
matrix re-imprinting practicing. You've been doing it for over 10 years. Can you expand on that?
So I really didn't know there's anything happening with me. I just thought I'm a dysfunctional person in my 20s, and I was hoping I can reform myself somehow. I I tried the typical self-medication tour, and
Right.
um, I also tried following the Dalai Lama and tried following other lamas, tried meditate myself out of my brain. My best friend was a monk, and we just spent hours and hours talking about the mind, and I was imagining myself how I'm going to reform myself in a cave. It's going to take 3 years. I'm going to shut the door and just going to like get that badness out of myself, like get that
Wow.
reactivity out, because I felt like I'm just out of control and unable to deal with the world. But
Hmm.
it was so deep, like things like that, the beliefs about yourself and your coping behaviors, they form so early that, and then you just run with it, that you don't have a kind of a mechanism to be like, oh, I know what that is and I know what I can do. So it took me a while, and I tried everything that we all try to do. I even went for therapy, and that was great to kind of look into it. But after a while, I just felt like I go in, I talk about it, great, we know what's happening, but there wasn't much of a shift in the way I was feeling. And I stumbled, just by been searching forever. So I stumbled upon the EFT technique, and after first session, I just went for a training, and the trainer was like, "Hey, anybody wants to try this on something they got going on like a something that happened to them?" And I raised my hand, and thank God I did, because
Uh,
within an hour I was able to talk about a story I thought I'll never even be able to bring up.
wow.
And stories like this, the traumas, they have many aspects. So I worked on a few aspects, but it helped me so much that I was able to at least bring it to my awareness and accept it as a story, just as a story, without trying to suppress it or without trying to act on it. And of course, because of the many aspect value, it came up in my life a few more times, and I always looked into it, and I worked with it, because we are all just people, and there's no magic bullet. But it kind of showed me a way how to look deep, deep, deep to the roots of what's been bothering me, that I kind of couldn't find a way to deal with that. And then I stumbled upon matrix reimprinting, which is a buildup of the emotional freedom technique. And I've never found anything that's been so much like, I just tell you what I've experienced with, as somehow I always end up working with people that have some type of a war in their life. And I
Wow.
had this I had this client who had this anger issue with his child, and it was just too much for him to deal with it, but he did not want to continue with that. And it was just a simple trigger, that it was a patient's issue, but we kept working on that trigger, and it kept coming in. He kept bringing up his dad, the way his dad was treating him, and that level of helplessness and fear as a child when he saw someone going off with that emotional explosivity and reactivity. So it made him scared of his own child's feelings, and then
Wow.
that brought up the same helplessness, that he wasn't able to do anything, the same feeling he had with his father. And because of the matrix reprinting, we it's kind of a process where you follow your feelings and your little, it's called an echo, like the pictures you remember, and even if you don't, you kind of, your body tells you where to go. And he was able to see, and it's interesting you shared the story with your father. He was seeing his father, who experienced this thing, the same thing they had to hide because the Nazis took their house and everything, and they had to hide in the woods. And he could see his father as a little boy being very scared, but also feeling very helpless
Hmm.
and unable to do anything, and being angry, but just had to put everything inside him and stuff it inside. And he was able to see how his father's experience influenced his parenting, and then see how that influenced his own response to his child. And
Wow.
not that we rewrote history, things still happened, but the energy shifts and the beliefs and the empathy that came up for his father and for himself. you know we are hurt people. It's not that we, in our relationships, we lash out or we do things that hurt others because we want to. It's just because we have some, unhealed pain. But seeing it from that empathy for for our parents and for ourselves, without pointing fingers of who's to blame, I feel like that's really liberating, while holding, your boundaries. It doesn't mean, hey, walk walk all around me. I It's all good.
Interesting. You mentioned you mentioned viewing it just as a story. So are you kind of externalizing it where you're separating it from yourself? What do you mean by that?
You're talking about the way I saw that traumatic experience.
That's right.
So you're able to recall the story, which is just the event, and then based on the event, you had a permanent brain wiring that made you deal with the event. The trauma can show up in your body, can show up as a chronic disease, can show up in your emotional state as a mental health issue. You can have, you smell something and you start reacting to it, you don't
Hmm.
know why. And it deals with all these little aspects of the event by desensitizing and making them neutral, without denying, without being, oh, I'm good now, it didn't happen, I'm gonna say affirmations and it's gonna be good. It
Hmm.
actually works with your, like, with the neurotransmitters. It works with your, like, energy system, with the acupressure points, and it all kind of goes into the subconscious somehow, and then just tells the brain to chill, that it's no longer a threat, in a nutshell.
Wow.
And I've seen so much work with veterans with PTSD. And in the clinical studies, we have now so many alternative therapies, but there's only few that kind of work very quickly. And then that, for a person who is struggling with aftermath of trauma, or you're drowning in your parenting experience, that time is precious. Could be the difference between suicidal thoughts and getting better. So
It's quite a mechanism. So if you're a parent and you're listening, and maybe the parent's unsure that they have these traumatic episodes, and but they're, I'm sure that happens quite often. They're just kind of like you said, they're dealing with it and they're squashing it down. What signs should they look for, and what should they be doing?
well, that's the beauty of parenting, that if you follow your child's lead, especially the toddlers, because they are the best at pushing our buttons.
Hmm.
It's fantastic. You can just follow that. Immediately when you are triggered, you know,
Hmm.
when you step away, look where that guides you. Look for that one unhealed thing in that issue. So,
Wow.
for example, this mom having tantrums with her daughter before bed. What she didn't realize is that they changed the routine a little bit. Her daughter turned 2 and she wanted milk. She didn't realize she wanted to pour the milk herself.
Hmm.
So, and immediately as her daughter started to react, she had that, disconnection from the emotion, because she didn't know what she's reacting to, but her distress was causing more distress in her, and she didn't know what to do, and that level of helplessness just triggered her. Not that she started yelling, but she wasn't able to connect with her daughter,
Wow.
to just, step away and say, hey, what's how can I help you? Or and toddlers, children and people, we are like 90% emotional beings and 10% rational beings. And
Hmm.
but we keep talking to each other, and especially to children, in very rational way. But what toddlers need is to be on their heart level and have their feelings validated. And when we can validate them, then the tension becomes to turns into a full-blown tantrum.
Wow.
So when she was able to look into that reaction and see, oh wow, I am reacting because I recall how my mother used to, how my mother threw my toys away because I didn't clean up the way she wanted me to.
Ah.
And she saw that same feeling in her like in her stomach. That pit in her stomach was the same feeling she had when
Hmm.
the toys flew out of the window. She was able to connect that this is what she's reacting to, not her daughter, you know, disrespecting her by, throwing the milk on the ground, but by her unhealed pain from having that experience. And when she let go and neutralize those feelings, she was then, able to, next time it happened, she was able to actually connect with her daughter and be like, you know what, let's figure it out. How can I help? And it was all about that, she wanted to pour the milk herself.
Hmm.
And since she figured it out, she was able to connect. Voila, there were no more tantrums at night. And again, there's no magic bullet, but with parenting, when you start reacting and you don't have a mechanism to, this is the chronic reactions. I'm not saying, we are all stressed. Sometimes we are all tired. We all have work, like there's deadlines. It's normal. But when you find those chronic kind of repeating patterns that one thing always gets you and you have troubles getting out of that, then it's, deeply subconscious from something that happened to you, for something that's not healed yet. And it's your journey to find that and heal yourself while reconnecting with yourself and with your child.
And when you work with parents, do they already know there's a problem, or do they trying to figure out are they trying to figure out what it is, or do they know the problem, they just can't solve it, or do they not know they have a problem, or is it all the above?
I think it's nicely put. I think it's all of the above.
Mm.
And usually they have this amazing drive. They don't know how or why, but they want to help their child. And that's what is the most, I think, even
Mm.
healing ways for me to see is that
Mm.
even though there's darkness in your life, you you keep turning yourself towards the light, towards kindness, towards raising a being that can make a big difference in the world in a way that he or she feels supported. And even if you don't have skills, you just want to figure it out. You keep looking for solutions and you keep going. And I find those are the parents that benefit from my and other people's help, because they are on a path to, they are searching. And they can't tell you why this is happening. They don't have the script, but they firmly and strongly believe that the children should be raised in peace and acceptance. And when
Well,
you oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you please.
And when you pursue that path, you can heal yourself
Mm.
through seeing that experience that your child is having in a different way. Like, my father wasn't there much. They were divorced. I saw him on the weekends here and there. And what I really yearned, and I hated my cousin for it, because she had a dad, and one time he carried her when we came back from a trip, and he carried her in his arms home. And I must have been like 6 or 7, but I remember that yearning for it and just being not able to recognize what I'm feeling, just feeling this deep, deep hate toward her.
Mm.
But now when I see my husband carrying my daughter, playing with her, having just such an intimate, great time, I am healing that piece in myself that did
Mm.
not experience that. And it's such a great feeling to be able to have these experiences even
Mm.
as a mom, not as the child, as the recipient, but just seeing how it's done. And it's an amazing feeling. And when my daughter comes with something that I know my parents would immediately be like, coming up with the rough treatment and being dismissive, and I have a chance to do it other ways and to be, just open to her needs and accept that after we are done and I take a breather, because of course it's challenging. I have such a great feeling of, I did something else, I did it differently, and I can see it happening with some other being now. And it's an amazing, inspiring, and nurturing feeling.
Hmm. You mentioned that you were raised like a boy.
Right. Yeah, I think that was something very unresolved on my mother's end, where she kind of hoped she'll have 6 boys
Hmm.
who will all be on a national team playing soccer. And somehow, I was born as a girl, and she noticed, but emotionally didn't take a note. So as a reward, she would call me Michael when I was good and I was behaving well.
Interesting.
So it wrecked, it was a, now that I see it, how it must have been confusing for myself to be physically, emotionally girl, not having any trans feelings, but having my mother who was so, I don't want to say fetish, but it was a pretty strong boy determination, and how I try to fit that and how I try to be the boy for her, and then just push my girliness on the side and any not really coming to it until puberty, like being the
Hmm.
boy that I thought I should be. And that, as we talked about the program 0 to 6, I was just running that program, a boy, a boy, a boy. And maternity or motherhood for me was a big conflict, like emotional conflict on a very deep level, because how can you keep being the boy and still have this female process go through your
Mm.
body?
There's plenty of women on the national soccer teams now. There's
Yeah,
uh, that's amazing. So, were you the youngest?
I was the only child, and not really. It was a mess. I was
Oh,
not
I
supposed
see.
to
I
supposed to
see.
be there.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. And it's amazing to me how you've had to deal with this for so long, and you've found ways to cope with it, and now you're helping others to do it, to help them. Where where was that decision done? Because I know so many people will just kind of live with it and move on. Where was the decision to help others do it as well?
That's funny. Funny you're asking. I think it's been deeply rooted within myself that I've been trying to serve others
Hmm.
and help others, and it was that immediate pull. Like when I was a teenager and I heard about the what's happening in Tibet and the whole refugee situation, I was immediately drawn to it, and I didn't know why, and I didn't ask, and I ended up, you know, for 10 years in that in being around that, around refugees, around Tibetan refugees. And
Wow.
I even, with my husband, we took honeymoon to Greece when there was the Olympic flame ceremony for Beijing 2008, and we stopped the Olympic flame as a protest. And I was just huge on helping others, and I think internally I was trying to help myself, but I didn't know what's happening.
Hmm.
And then when my world kind of collapsed and I had to help myself first, I still had that strong passion. And finding out the tools, I think all of us, or most of us, who are looking for bettering ourselves are striving for a better world. And there's no such thing as a better world without peaceful and confident children. So I found that that would be my way of contributing,
Hmm.
my craft to a better world.
That's remarkable. You know, I always get asked, I don't know how much you know about me, but I lost a lot of weight, and people always ask me, how'd you lose the weight? And I say, well, it's just discipline. I just got focused. Doctor said I wasn't going to be around when my daughter graduated. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life. Do you consider yourself a disciplined person, Klara?
Um, that's such an interesting question. Do you find yourself a disciplined person?
I find myself to be disciplined in certain areas and others not. In areas that I set goals for in my business, I can be quite disciplined, but then there's other areas that are just a mess. And it needs more focus and kind of structure.
Hmm.
And yourself?
Um, I think if there's a task and there's passion,
Hmm.
then there's no need of discipline. Things just go.
Hmm.
Then if there's a task, there's a passion, but there's also a lot of, fear, and my brain's not used to going this way, and I don't trust myself because that's my old programming that I'm not good enough, and I can't do it. And then I find that's where I struggle. But for me to achieve something when I have this situation is not really through, and I don't want to say harsh discipline, but it's more through being kind to myself.
Hmm.
So instead of saying I will have to, do this, it's more, let me see what I need to do for myself so I can achieve that. So starting a business as a mom, or continue your business as a mom, it's, you could give yourself so many goals, and you go through discipline, and achieve that, achieve that, achieve that. But you have to be aligned with what you're doing. So it's the way you structure it for yourself. And like, you probably lost that weight because you were so motivated, right, by your own child.
Certainly.
So I think the motivation is a big picture for me in discipline, motivation,
Hmm.
and kindness to the process of going somewhere. So it's never a straight journey for me, and I think that rarely happens. And when we find roadblocks, it's for a reason. It's for us to discover something, and maybe there is a learning lesson in that roadblock. And I truly believe in the, I think it's the poet, Rilke who said, grow into the answers,
Hmm.
in this letters to a young poet. I think that's what he meant by that. Just instead of forcing myself and seeing the journey as steps and disciplining myself to do them, I give myself enough wiggle room to grow into the next step.
What a fascinating answer, Clara. So you're saying that when you have goals and destinations in mind, discipline, self discipline is just one of the elements to get you there.
Right.
And when you're working with people to deal with their trauma, is discipline an element needed for them?
No, I don't think
Hmm,
so. I think it's more of a able to accept and accept yourself where you are, and accept that you are in healing mode,
hmm,
which could be frustrating when you are trying to go somewhere but you're not in the action mode, you are actually in the repair mode. It's like,
interesting.
pulling a broken car on a highway and be like yelling at it and be like, go, go, go. Every car mechanic knows that first you have to make it rideable and then you can go.
Hmm,
But with our life busyness, and especially parenting and being busy, you don't have that chance sometimes to go back to the garage. So we put so much on ourselves to go while we don't have the mechanisms and spare parts in place.
yeah, might the journey for that person to get into that repair mode, into that, involve pushing away some of the extraneous items in life and involve a level of self-discipline. I perhaps I just throw that out.
Yeah. No, I think for a person that's healing, the self discipline could be showing up as a way of searching for answers.
Mm,
That you're, you want to go somewhere and you're honoring that feeling, but you're also are open to the search. And that could be a piece of discipline.
hmm,
But I find personally, when it comes to when we talk discipline and parenting, that I rarely find that discipline works if you
mm,
don't call it as a guidance.
mm,
And when you look on your own goals and you're trying to achieve something, you are following yourself, you're guiding yourself towards a goal. So if you can be a understanding, kind, yet, you know, if you can be a kind and understanding guide to yourself while still taking those steps forward, I think that can be a great experience instead of the, oh, I'm taking this challenge and I'm doing that challenge, and then feeling bad about yourself because maybe you didn't completed the X steps that you set for yourself. But what is it? Is it the destination is the journey?
hmm.
So that's, I think, my look at the discipline piece.
What motivates you, Clara?
I think what motivates me is the light, the beauty, the kindness that is all around us when we have a chance to accept it and look for it.
That's fascinating. The light when you I just need to soak that in for a moment. And how do you define the light? Do you find it as success itself, or the destination, or the joy, the euphoria? How do you define that?
I think when you meet a person on the street and he looks at you and he sends you a kind smile,
Hmm.
that's the light.
Hmm.
If you help someone without planning to help, without strings attached, or you get the help without strings attached because just because, I think that's
Right.
the light.
Delight.
That's the light we all have within us. And obviously there's other light in beauty and, in nature and the world, but the light we all have as human beings within us, I think that's what motivates me.
Wow. Hmm. And how do you measure success?
For myself, or
Yeah.
I think my feeling of success is feeling good about the process, about the journey. So if it's in business, am I achieving what I wanted to achieve while being feeling balanced and feeling the joy from the process? Or am I getting too much on the rush there, get things done, or am I too much falling back, feeling stressed I'm not doing enough? So finding that balance of going forward and feeling I'm doing it in a self-accepting way without sacrificing my personal, space of sanity, which is a interesting walk with young children and the business. So, and I'm still learning to do that as we speak, because I was rushing to this interview. My child just had a terrible time me
Oh
leaving
no.
the daycare. So as we speak, I'm looking, and it's like I have a message like she's crying, she's still crying. I'm like,
Wow.
so success is for me that I'm doing it with everybody that I love, and I'm not neglecting myself or the people that I love.
Mm. Mm. Well, Klara Sedlacek, absolute pleasure. I was excited to talk to you. I'm so glad we did. Trauma is just something that's recurring. I get to talk to a lot of vets. I get to talk to a lot of people that suffer from it, and your great work and others like you. I mean, the way that you not only dealt with yourself, but you're helping others is remarkable. That doesn't happen often, and in my opinion, the sign of a wonderful person. If we wanted to get out and get in touch with you, how can we do so?
You can just look at my website at klarasedlacek.com, and I hope you'll have a link there for your listeners, because
Absolutely.
this is a Czech name, so it has a very specific. It's Klara with a K to
Right.
start with. And it was a very specific spelling, so it's KLARASEDLACEK.com.
Very good. And we'll put that in the show notes. We'll be sure to. Thank you so much for your time today. An absolute pleasure. And I assume your husband's Greek because you also speak Greek.
He's Czech. My mother is
He's Czech.
Greek.
Ah, your
Hmm.
mother's Greek. I see.
Hmm.
Very good. I was going to say maybe one day we'll all get together and have a Greek meal all together. But
But
it was a great pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to eventually maybe seeing you face to face. But have a wonderful day, and hopefully we get to see each other in the future. You
thanks
be
for
well.
having me, Joe. My
Beer.
pleasure.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.